Hello, everybody, and welcome to Catholic Unscripted 30. We got there, the big 30. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashington.
Thank you to everyone who's been watching, listening and sharing. Please continue to do so. We've just recently, as we said in our last video, started up a Facebook page. So that's another place you can catch us, Catholic Unscripted. So do please take a look. So quite a few things to discuss this week. And we're going to start with Father Altman. So the history of Father Altman is that back in 2020, he's a parish priest who back in 2020 was quite vocal and spoke to Catholics saying that they shouldn't vote Democrat because of their democratic position on abortion. And he was then prohibited from celebrating Mass publicly by Bishop Callahan, who under we suppose superches orders. At the same time, this Bishop Callahan has been asking for money, doing some fundraising, asking for $40 million in a fundraising campaign, and has put back on parish duties Monsignor Burrill, who was outed as going on homosexual dating apps. So there's some all sorts of murky background to this, and in the middle of it was Altman, who, despite Burrill being left to continue his duties, Altman was cancelled. And so then a year later, Father Altman has continued to speak up, and just recently has said that Pope Francis is not in fact the Pope, which we'll discuss there, this comment from Father Altman. Why did he say it? I know you're familiar with Father Altman, aren't you, Mark, and perhaps even count him as a friend. So you might be able to tell us a bit more about this. So why did he come to this conclusion? What does he mean when he says that? What are the implications?
Well, it's interesting because I think that it's sort of part of this. The reason that he's come to this conclusion is because of the actions of Pope Francis. And most people who've spoken about Father Altman's videos have been focused on the fact that, they're more interested really in Father Altman and Father Altman's approach and, various elements of his personality, or, he's a bit Irish ranty, he's a bit fighting Irish, as they say in the States.
Yeah.
I met him briefly a couple of years ago, and I've sort of chatted to him, and I've found him to be an excellent pastor, a very faithful man, someone who really believes in the faith, and someone who really believes in the Catholic Church. And so I think sometimes we have to turn the heat off a little bit and look at what's really going on. And I think really the thing to be talking about with what Father Altman said is, he's saying the same thing as lots of cardinals and bishops have been saying, which is that there's a problem with this papacy. And the problem is that his words and actions contradict the deposit of faith. And I think basically Father Altman saying that at some point he stops being. At what point does he stop being the Pope? Like, at what point is that contradiction between the See of Peter, the office of the See of Peter, and this man Jorge Bergoglio? What point does that chasm become so vast that we can no longer bridge the respect that we have for the office with the actions? And I think when you come to this point, when you look at the fact that, especially I think in the wake of his appointment of Fernandez as the head of the congregation for the dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith as it is now, and it's not the first one. He's just this week appointed Antonio Spadaro, who is the lunatic who famously, said publicly that 2 + 2 equals 5. And it's a silly point, but the point is that, what's this guy done? He's just caused trouble. It's factionalism in the church. If nothing else, you have to look at the church at this moment in time, and you just see incredible factions. Different people with different opinions and the Pope feeds this with his rants against this type of Catholic and that type of Catholic, and forgetting somehow that he is the Pope for all Catholics, and that it's a universal church. And I really felt this when I was in Lourdes earlier this year, that you've got all these people coming together. And what's the thing that draws us all together is Christ. It's the call to holiness. And that's what we should be focused on as a people. And instead, we've got a Pope who seems to be determined to push us into different factions. So what would I say? You know, all right, has Father Altman got the authority to declare that Jorge Bergoglio is not the Pope? No, I don't think he has. I don't know that. I think that's way beyond any of our pay grades. But we're getting to that point in history where you have to have John the Baptist type figures, Jeremiah, you know, calling out, you know, and maybe he's a prophet, maybe he's being used by God. I'd certainly say that his intentions are good to look after people and the church, the same as Strickland or Schneider or, you know, any Erdo, or, you know, you can the numbers are growing, aren't they?
Yeah.
People who are speaking out.
I thought that Michael Hitchborn's response to him was really brilliant, because whilst everything you're saying is true and Father Altman's concerns are shared by many, including ourselves, really, that Hitchborn explained it really well and said to pass judgment, we must have authority over the judged. And he gave this example of the boy who shouted, the emperor's not wearing any clothes. And he says the boy was perfectly entitled to say, the emperor's not wearing any clothes. And in fact, he was right, and calling that to others' attention. But what he didn't do was say, therefore, he's not the emperor. And so I thought that's really important point. And he said in his article, it's exceedingly dangerous to our own souls and the souls of others to assume authority we do not possess in order to render judgments we cannot ratify. And so Hitchborn wasn't saying, you know, that all Father Altman's concerns are invalid. We all know that they're perfectly valid concerns. And to be blunt, we got a bad Pope at the moment. Yeah, we're living under a bad Pope. We hope in our lifetimes we see a good Pope. We may or may not. But the question of authority remains that it's not under our authority to make such a statement and to declare that he's not the Pope. So I think if we're going to listen to Father Altman, which I think is certainly, I wouldn't dismiss him entirely, but I think it has to be in conjunction with Hitchborn's response, which was brilliant, I thought. Gavin, what do you think?
Yes, well, I agree with Mark. I found that there's a man called Father Jason Charon who was interviewed by Matt Fradd, and I thought he was brilliant because he's saving us from what is in fact a very serious trap, and the trap is schism. You know, it's dreadful to have become a Catholic at the only time in history when the joke is the Pope a Catholic becomes a serious political and theological question instead of a joke. And what Sharon was saying was that most of the time, the holder of the Petrine office speaks as Jorge Bergoglio. He says the things that a Peronist bishop or cardinal or clergy person might say, but he doesn't say them with papal authority or with papal intent or purpose. Or if he does have the intent, they don't stick because they're not congruent with his office itself. And so I think instead of trying to say he's no longer the Pope, Mark and Hitchborn are quite right. It's the little boy can say he's got no clothes, but he can't say he's not the emperor. So we don't say he's not the emperor. We say he has no clothes. And other people have said, I think quite reassuringly, well, look, what on earth has he done to change the Catholic Church? He hasn't done anything. And the answer is, well, that's true. And what he's done is disastrous, but not systematically wholly destructive. Disastrous because he's protected child abusers and he has appointed people who are quite clearly heterodox in their faith. That's disastrous. It's terrible. It doesn't stop him being Pope, as Catherine, you quite rightly said. He's a suboptimal Pope. So, because for most of us, the question is what happens in the next conclave. That's what we're praying for and waiting for. And it could turn out to be that the period we're living in through is a temporary hiccup in which there was a lot of pain, and we like Father Altman got overexcited, and we shouldn't have done. Or it could be that this is a picnic compared to what's coming. But we have to trust God. We don't know.
From the inside, especially this week, I don't know if I've shared this with you guys, but I was contacted by someone who basically was saying that, so from an Episcopal point of view, that their budgets are being cut. And this person was saying, you know, surely this is a result of the war that Pope Francis has ignited with the Americans. And here we see it with Altman. Altman is, you know, the voice of normal America. Let's face it, you know, your average Catholic, this is what they're feeling. And we know that because we were over there last year and took the temperature, and we, you know, we knew that, you know, regular everyday Catholics are feeling betrayed by this Pope.
Yeah.
They know who the shepherds are, they know who the good people are. And so to see him going after Strickland, you know, like that's, I mean, I don't think he could make a worse move politically than taking down Strickland. Good luck if that's what you want to try and do. But I think the war with America has caused a massive financial hole in the Vatican's finances. And I would imagine that even if you're not interested in the faith, the money men in Rome are going to be going, hang on a minute, you know, this can't, and they've obviously done this deal with China that they were hoping was going to plug some of the gaps. And I don't think it is. So I think in a lot of ways, that's why you're seeing this continued and renewed sort of attack on America, which is absolutely detestable as far as I'm concerned, that the Pope should single out a country the way that he has and go after it again and again and again. It disgusts me, frankly. You know, I really despair with it.
Well, you mentioned Strickland there, Bishop Strickland of Tyler, and he's speaking up, holding, you know, reminding us of the church doctrine, holding fast to that. And in August, he released his pastoral letter, which was reiterating basic truths of the church. Christ established one church. Sacraments are divinely instituted, about our identity in Christ rather than our identity in anything else, such as our sexuality and so on. Confirming sex outside marriage is gravely sinful, whether or not you're homosexual or heterosexual. Universalism is false, and we must pick up our cross. He said to hold fast to these during this time of ambiguity, during this time of the Synod. That was in August. In September, on September the 5th, he released another pastoral letter addressing the first of those basic truths, no salvation outside the church, and also addressed the question of women priests and women deacons. And on the 12th of September, he released another pastoral letter addressing the basic truths that Christ instituted the sacraments. And then after that, just very recently, only last week, I think, or a few days ago, he heard that he had been asked to resign, although he was saying he hadn't heard it directly from the Vatican. But as a basic principle, he said, I cannot resign. The mandate given to me by Benedict XVI, it cannot be rescinded. It could be rescinded by Pope Francis, but he can't voluntarily abandon his flock. So he's putting it back to Pope Francis and saying, if you want to get rid of me, you can, but I'm not going. This is very irregular and unusual. So as you said, he's not going anywhere. What's the next step? What's the next move? Why do you think they are trying to get rid of Strickland, and what's going to happen next, do you think?
I think Strickland has actually said that the Pope is undermining the deposit of faith. That's where you've got the problem. So he's had the courage to identify the problem, you know, is with some of the things that Pope Francis is saying. And we know that Amoris Laetitia chapter 8, for example, you know, there was some very peculiar or concerning teachings in terms of moral theology that very much looked like it was rowing back, you know, some of the things that kind of pre-Vatican II Bernard Haring sort of theology. And that was addressed very clearly in Veritatis Splendor. So there were a number of cardinals who wrote what's known as a dubia, which is a question to the Pope asking for clarification. And the Pope decided that he wouldn't answer that dubia, that is irregular.
Yeah.
So we've got this situation where, you know, we've got a Pope who's ambiguous at best, certainly not very clear about what he's teaching. It's left for us to argue about, you know, the validity, which is less than satisfactory. So what's Strickland doing? He is stating the faith as we would all understand it to have always been. There's absolutely nothing radical or, you know, unusual in any of the things he said. Thank God for him. If every bishop did that, we would be in a lot stronger position as as a Catholic communion. So you know, I've got nothing but praise for Strickland. Everyone in America knows that he's brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, he's got huge support. And I just think in a situation where you've got the Luxembourg bishops going ahead with gay blessings in contradiction to the Vatican, you've got the Bishop of Berlin saying that it's okay to bless homosexual unions.
Yeah.
There are problems abound throughout the church, and you've got this Pope. He decides to take down Strickland. And how does Strickland find out? Because the Pillar report about it.
Yeah.
So someone with a flappy mouths in the Vatican
Yeah.
talks to the Pillar before anyone's had the courtesy to let the good bishop know.
Yeah.
And I think canonically, I'm not even sure that they can do it. I think if he's not able to fulfill his role, if he's infirm or if he's you know, if there's malfeasance, then they can remove him. But I don't think they can remove him just for doing his job, you know.
No.
And he's not the only one, is there? There's that Bishop of Puerto Rico who was also removed because he supported the Latin Mass, and Pope Francis, you know, sort of removed him. So is this, you know, the other bishops must be going, hang on a minute, you know, like what about Paprocki and Cardinal, and you know, there's a lot of good bishops in America. They all must be looking at their back now and thinking, hang on a minute, you can't even rely on, if you're Orthodox, you can't even rely on the Pope. You know, if you teach what the church has always taught, you painted a sign on your back. I mean, isn't it ridiculous? Is this not getting beyond ridiculous now?
Yeah, it's totally unlikely that Strickland's done anything that rises to the level of a punishable offence. So it's now this. I mean, you put something the other day on your blog or on your Twitter saying, well, the thing is, if what's happening with this is if you do silence people, if you do shut people up, the thing is he's still got such a voice, and you know, all you're doing really is it's Satan's game, isn't it? It's you know, let's kill Christ, look, we've won, and 3 days later the resurrection. So you know the end, you know that the good will always win over evil, but such as it is. But I'm not sure what's going to happen here. I found it interesting that Mike Lewis tweeted, it's taken Pope Francis however long to do Laudate Si', and it only took Strickland 2 weeks to respond with another pastoral letter, as if, you know, stupid Strickland, he hasn't thought about it. But of course the point is what Strickland's doing is Bishop Strickland is he's just reasserting eternal truths, basic truths. It doesn't take long to do that. You know? So
not making up a whole
it's not making
thing.
stuff up. So you wouldn't expect it to take 10 years, 5 years, and so on. So yeah,
the greatest irony surely is that this is the Pope of Parousia. You know, he wanted strong dialogue, he wanted open discussion, and now he's closed the synod and said that he's not going to allow any journalists to report on it.
Yeah, he has indeed.
See the hypocrisy in it all.
I know.
You're blind and stupid, aren't you? You know.
I know. Well, that brings us in a moment to Muller. Strickland then, for Bishop Gavin. Talking of Bishop Strickland, I nearly gave you the authority you don't have, Gavin.
Indeed, I don't. Well, I was comparing Strickland with Altman, and I don't mean any criticism to Altman, but essentially, under pressure, Altman's become intemperate. Who wouldn't? I would have become more intemperate, but he has become intemperate, and it's a good lesson, I think, for us all that the more intemperate you become, the more dignity and authority you lose, and so partly because of his pain and rage, justified though it is. Altman's a hard person to gather behind. Strickland's in another matter entirely. He's behaved with enormous dignity, and I think I'm just reminded really of Pilate and Jesus. It's almost as if the powers in the Vatican, I guess this isn't Francis himself, this is almost certainly the clique who operate power on his behest. They're infuriated with Strickland. And this is simply the wonderful drama between good and evil. Evil always overreaches itself. And in one sense, we might be grateful, because what happened is, because Altman was intemperate, it immediately gives his critics a degree of probity they don't deserve. Well, you know, here's a shouty man. We're going to treat him like a shouty man. But the moment they attack Strickland, as they have, he's not a shouty man, and they appear therefore to be vengeful and heterodox as they are. And I think what that's going to do, my guess is that, as Marx said, this was one of Marx's best most perceptive questions, I think, and set me thinking. What are the other bishops and cardinals going to make of this? Well, they're going to see two things. First of all, quite rightly, the money taps are being turned off. Anyone who's concerned with running an organization knows that's a dreadfully serious place to be, and not one you'd want to be if you can avoid it. So the war on America is a racist, stupid venture that must be avoided at all costs. And it may very well be that when it comes to the next conclave, they'll make sure it's not, that they don't choose another angry South American with anti-American prejudice. But the other thing is, I think they'll see that you can't afford to cancel all the Orthodox bishops. You just can't afford. I mean, wonderfully, there are lots of them, isn't that? That's great. Some of them are being discreet and quiet and keeping their heads down, and why shouldn't they? But many of them will say, if this can happen to Strickland, it can happen to us. And if we have to choose between amor laetitia or the honor and dignity of our office, many of them will choose the office. And so I think, to some extent, politically and theologically, this may actually be quite helpful when it comes to the next conclave, in order to give the voting cardinals a sense of what they'd be voting in if they choose to give us a Francis II. They'll give us more cancel culture, more Stricklands will come to the surface. The dangerous schism will draw ever nearer. I wouldn't be surprised if the Strickland affair, more than the Vigano affair, because again, Vigano became, I mean, I like him very much, but he also became intemperate, and it became quite difficult for those of us who are sympathetic with Vigano to distinguish between sensible Vigano and off-the-wall Vigano. I can't distinguish. I mean, I wish I could. I'd like to believe everything he says, but I don't. And so,
don't you think that's you can sort of see the enemy at work there, can't you? Someone who has truth and is really doing good, but then it's like this little sort of something slips in to build mistrust, and I can just see something there of like sort of destroying him and his character, and at the same time the truth that he is able to speak.
Yeah, I think that sums it up very well.
And I think if you pay attention to what Father Altman's saying, and I suppose it's different for me because I know him as a person, as a human being. And he's a lovely priest, he is a lovely priest.
Clearly.
And a lot of people say, that he's got loads of time for everyone when he's at anything, and he's very gentle. And so I would just say, if you listen to what he's actually saying, I can't pick any holes.
Yeah,
it's factually very, very good, the actual material. Okay, so when he says, "God damn," if you're living in an environment where the bishops are, covering up abuse, and then I think that resonates with the common man. That resonates with those of us who are fathers and teachers and catechists who are saying that, this is the betrayal of the faith is going on here. And because we're allowing it to, because we're sort of going, okay, well, we need to be temperate in a way. So I although I totally agree that I would totally agree that Strickland has more resonance and more authority because of his approach. I feel like that's my subjective judgment on the situation. I think the fact that Altman has got so much weight behind him, so many followers, so many people who it speaks to the fact that he does resonate with an audience, and that there is a problem here that needs to be addressed. And if Pope Francis, if the liberal and progressive wing of the church keep just silencing and isolating those people who are simply trying to follow Jesus in an orthodox way, I think it's really interesting. This is how it comes apart, isn't it? This is how you start to see it. This is how you start to see Jesus at the center of it all, and it won't ever fail because it can't, because the gospel is there, and do you know what I mean? It's like they can't deny that it is. We can't deny that this is what we've taught for all these years, and we can't deny that this is an innovation. So we were talking between ourselves, weren't we, about the importance of understanding the development of doctrine. I think is something that bears being reinforced, because Supich, this is another strainer, we didn't say we talk about this, but Cardinal Supich brought out a letter that Father Chris shared with us all, didn't he? I don't know if any of you read it, but I read it, and it was actually really good in terms of the fact that it tried to draw a line between Pope Francis's ideas of the development of doctrine, and sort of what the church has always taught. So much so that if you didn't understand the development of doctrine, you say, "Oh yeah, that makes sense," But basically, fundamentally, to explain it to our listeners, is that they're trying to say, an elephant can develop into an oak tree. I think I said this before. And the whole idea of the development of doctrine, as it's taught by Vincent of Lorenz, who Pope Francis loves to quote, is the fact that you can't develop into not A. It teaches you more about A. You just become to fully understand A. And that's what the church means by the development of doctrine. So, even things like the death penalty, the Pope, is sort of in very dodgy ground by saying that it's that's the development of doctrine, let alone rules about sexuality and stuff like that, which is just manifestly wrong.
It's my contention that I think that this question about capital punishment is actually a bit of a Trojan horse, because it's once you manage to sort of say this is how development of doctrine should be understood on this matter, then it can be used then to say, well, look at these other matters and look at sexual morality. But quite right, Bishop Barron always says it's not about it's about having a white fence that you sort of continue to paint white, and you give it a fresh coat. You don't paint it black or red. It's still the same white fence, but you've just sort of kept it nourished and so that it can be seen. So it's not that one thing becomes another, which is how I think we're being led to understand it as. Sorry, Gavin.
Well, that was what. I'm sorry to interrupt you. That was one of the things that was so surprising, and that was that the argument was so theologically naff. You would have expected someone to have found something that couldn't so easily be rebutted. The church has never changed its understanding on slavery. It's the church that has, with its sanctification of the individual, and medieval orders who sprung into being in order to buy back slaves and redeem them. In English terms, the evangelicals taking the political action to free them. The church has always been very clear about slavery. I've forgotten who it was. It might have been Bishop Barron. It was Bishop Barron who said, you need also to understand the complexity of slavery. That it was almost like a welfare state. One of the reasons why Paul didn't advocate its complete abolishment was because lots of slaves were entirely dependent upon the goodwill of their masters, particularly as they grew old and unproductive, for being looked after. There was a benign aspect of mutual responsibility in a way that isn't understood if you just project from the American experience of the South in the 19th century. But the church's teaching about slavery has always been the same. As Catherine, you've just intimated, it has been about the death penalty. And the idea of suggesting that these are places in which the doctrine has developed, what's changed is the way in which the doctrine has been practiced with in different contexts at different times with different emphases. It was a really silly argument. Quite vacuous, and its very vacuity suggests that they're trying to pull a fast one. And I think, as we all know, they can only change the morality of the church by pretending it's development when we know that it's contradiction.
That stuff about the capital punishment as well, and the development of doctrine, or the apparent changes there, ties in as well with this question of authority that we picked up at the beginning with Altman and Hitchborn's response. That if you have a group of people who see someone in a shop thieving and holding someone at gunpoint and knife point, you see they've done it, you see the wrong they've done, but you have no authority to punish them. So you go to the police, the police make a case, they take it to the lawyers, the judge and the jury, and then there's under rightful authority that person might be sentenced to death or 50 years in prison or whatever the sentence might be. But you can recognize the rightness or the wrongness of something, the morality of something, but you don't have the authority to punish them. That lies elsewhere. So likewise, in going back to that, our recognition of the slightly underhand or ambiguous things that are coming forth in the church, it's quite right to call them out. And talking of characters, Father Altman, okay, he might speak in a way that is different to Bishop Strickland, but then we are all different. We respond differently, and we need St. John the Baptist, we need firebrands, we need people who are gonna speak in that way that touches the hearts of ordinary people. And yes, it's good to be polite and politically correct, and there's a place for that, and that will also touch some people. but we can't all be the same. We all have to speak as long as we're rooted in Christ, with the gifts that God's given us. And Father Altman happens to have those particular gifts. Sorry, Mark.
Well, if you bring it like Gavin was saying about Father Charon, and he was in conversation with Ben Shapiro, and that's so you've got people like Ben Shapiro who are recognizing the fact, as a conservative commentator, that the Catholic Church is an ally in the culture wars, and concerned about the direction that Pope Francis is taking the church in, because he can see the damage that's being done. So it's really interesting that you're seeing, and perhaps this is the way, perhaps through people like Father Altman, this is drawing attention to these things, because like there was that piece that you shared earlier today, Gavin, which sort of said that the press applaud Francis when he does something that's in line with secular morality, but they're not interested in anything else. They're not interested when he does anything Catholic, which I thought was a really good observation, because that's exactly what we've got. And so, you end up with, no one's paying us any attention when we're doing, it's sort of like he's trying to draw attention to the church by doing secular things. And then when he does something Catholic, it doesn't make any difference, which is what we would probably, all three of us, I would imagine, would have expected anyway. You can't feed, you can't feed that crocodile. It just does it always wants more. You're never going to feed it and it will be fed. So I think, so exactly as you're saying, I think there's a place, and that's all I'm saying is that I've been really surprised by the amount of people that have been really quite aggressive about Father Altman, and and we all feel this unnatural position for all of us Catholics, because we're so used to being on the side of the Pope, But I wouldn't, I would say pray for him, and let's try and be simple, try and listen to the content of what he's saying, because I think they're questions that need answers, and we need to direct those questions to Rome and to our bishops when they're trying to sell us ecological, nonsense, which seems to be most of what they do at all the dioceses are interested in at the moment.
Which seems to have the Earth, Mother Earth, as the end, the telos. That's not what it's ever been about. So I completely agree. Poor Father Mark Goring as well, who he's associated quite a bit with. I think he speaks on Pints with Aquinas quite a bit as well, doesn't he? He's got his own little channel, does some videos, only 5-10 minutes often, and he's just very recently rebuked the bishops, and he's in hot water now for simply saying the emperor's got no clothes. He wasn't saying the Pope isn't the Pope, just saying that. So he's in hot water. But very quickly, because I know we're running out of time, but to move on to Cardinal Muller, who you mentioned as well, Mark, he's just recently given an interview to Spanish Catholic news website Info Vaticana, expressing grave concerns about the Synod. And one of the things that we know about the Synod in October is that it will be closed to journalists. There'll be lay people casting a vote. And so Cardinal Muller was expressing these concerns, and he was, of course, under Pope Benedict XVI, the head of the dicastery of the Doctrines of Faith. Am I right? Did I get that right?
The congregation.
Yeah. So Muller, tell us about that interview, Gavin, Mark.
Oh no, Mark do the telling, and I'll do the gloss.
Mark.
Well, I thought it was. See, this was really interesting, because everyone was having a go at Father Altman, and then Muller seemed to say the same thing.
Yeah.
He basically came out and said that if they start teaching stuff that isn't if the cardinals come out and start teaching stuff that isn't in the deposit of faith, then they revoke their authority as teachers and pastors. Can't believe we're having these conversations, but I'm so glad that there are some people who have got the courage to stand up and say it, because you have to be, regular Catholics are struggling. We're really struggling with this stuff, and it's a terrible, terrible situation. That we've got a pope, and that he's, as Gavin was saying earlier, he's putting people in place. It looks very much like he's putting these people in place in order to push through stuff that is at odds with, doctrine. Now, I would say I'd go back to conversations we've had before and reinforce the fact that we've seen this with the Synod and family. We've seen it with the Amazonian Synod, where the same setup was, the same thing was played. and it got absolutely nowhere. So, you know, I'm not in any respect saying that, you know, God isn't in charge of this process, or but I do think that I remember with the Amazonian Synod, part of the pushback, I think it was against the viri probati issue that they were talking about, that the Pope actually said that he felt that the Holy Spirit had advised him not to do it, and I think that was because, you know, it was reported, I can't remember by who, that was because there was considerable pushback against the idea from the faithful. Now they're pushing this idea of the sensus fidelium, and well, we are that, you know, if they're giving us the all the kudos that they're giving us in terms of the synod and synodality, read the Instrumentum Laboris. We are apparently, you know, it's all down to us. Well, it was all down to us. Let's make our voices heard, I'd say, and get behind Muller, and you know, do the best that we can to speak up, and all, you know, what are we doing? We're speaking up for the gospel. We're speaking up for the faith that we love. That's all we're speaking up for. And no one wants to speak against the Pope. I think that's, you know, I don't think Father Altman wants to speak against the Pope. None of us do. But we have to call out. I mean, you're talking about, you know, some of the things that have gone on are just beyond the pale. Like, I think the one that really caught my attention the most was Zanchetta. You know, I don't know if you followed it. I followed it from the beginning. So this is someone who was, when Bergoglio was the head of the bishops' conference in Argentina, Zanchetta was his secretary. And as soon as he was made Pope, he made him a bishop in breach of canon rule. Obviously, he's the supreme legislator, so he can do whatever he wants. But he's, you know, half of the modus operandi has been just breaking rules left, right, and centre. And there were already allegations against Zanchetta, all kinds of allegations, and he ended up in prison. When he was kicked out of his diocese for abusing seminarians, the Pope gave him a special job in Rome at the Vatican Bank. I mean, you couldn't make this. I mean, how does he get? I don't know how you get away with that. And I don't know why it isn't more widely reported, and I don't know why the mainstream press haven't got onto it, but they haven't.
Well, because as you say, when they see the church is assimilating with the world, the standards of the world, they want to celebrate that. They want to celebrate that. They've got no interest in reporting any of this stuff. They, you know, it's perfectly appealing to them, to the world. And you know something's wrong when you're appealing to the world and not trying to change it. So, well, yes, we need to speak for sure. Everyone who with a voice, any faithful Catholic who loves Christ and Holy Mother Church needs to speak with the voice they've been given, whatever that is. If it's a bit of a shouty voice, have a little shout. If it's nice and peaceful and quiet and calm, do your bit. But not just that, because that alone is always going to be hollow. So we need to be rooted in prayer and strive for holiness ourselves, because we're going to stumble and fall. We all are. Father Altman, Cardinal Muller, every single one of us. But as long as we keep our eyes fixed on Christ and keep striving and keep praying to be pulled back up, that's why I agree with you. I think let's not dismiss someone for, you know, someone like Altman who
don't agree with their tenure.
Yeah. And keep praying for him. Yeah. Gav.
Oh, I don't anything to add to that. All very good.
Yeah, our news is that it looks almost certain that we're off to Chicago again for Chicago 2024. So to any of our American viewers and listeners, we don't know the full program yet, but it's looking like it will be around about the same time next year, around Easter time, just after. And we're really hoping to build a good program of talks and visits and keep those transatlantic links going. So once we know more, we'll share more on this channel. But anything that anyone in and around the area there can come to and join us at, we would absolutely love to see some of you.
And just to give a bit of coherence to it, one of the things I think I'm most excited about is the prospect of an open seminar, open lecture in the auditorium at Mundelein Seminary on entitled "The Crisis in the Catholic Conscience: A Transatlantic Conversation." So that the three of us will join some of the faculty and seminarians there, and looking precisely at the pressure and the information of the Catholic conscience and the need to bring it to life in these circumstances, which should be really quite an interesting and important conversation and event, we hope.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Gavin. Thanks, Gavin and Mark. And I'm Catherine Bennett. See you next time.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden. God bless.